Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 931 Storm of Death. It was an experiment, but he felt comfortable with the possible risk. After he finished the soul staff, the glue had also hardened, allowing Seth to continue with the enchantments of the wood. They were nothing spectacular, as the blacksmith didn't want to add too many different effects. This was why he chose the usual attribute-enhancing circuits that would improve the user's intelligence and willpower. He used bands of Ithilden to inlay the enchantments into the handle of the staff. On top of that, Seth also added inlays to the grooves of the spiral carved into the staff, to allow a better transition of magic power from the wooden part to the orb at the tip. This would mitigate the fact that one was holding the orb on a staff instead of the orb itself. All that was left was infusing the soul staff he had already prepared and giving it a swirl in the water of sticks to facilitate the soul's rebirth as an item. As the item started floating in the bubble of water, Seth heard the familiar notifications. Ding! You have finished a legendary item. Ding! The effect of a tool has changed your item. Ding! A synergy between powers has changed your item. Ding! A legendary pattern had been partially added to your path. Ding! You have gained 100p of power of existence. To his surprise, there was one message he had not expected. The special effect on Karen's obel had actually triggered and added another effect. Curious, he checked the stats of the new item. Storm of Death. Legendary. Mag damage, 3800. Physical damage, 500. Durability, 2800. 160% wind affection. 2 plus 650% wind damage and effects. 370% chant reduction on wind magic. 415% chant reduction. 5 plus 150% magic damage. 6 I am the storm. 7 trait, wind of death. 8 plus 70 intelligence. 9 plus 70 willpower. 10 ability, wind manipulation leave 3. 11 passive skill, wind steps. 12 active skill, storm scythe. 13 active skill, spell storage. 14 active skill, black clouds of isolation. 15 presence of furfur. A collaboration of masters on the path to legends. A domineering stick with overwhelming magic power was created by a collaboration between Master Smith, the first Master Enchanter and Master Blacksmith of Earth, and Master Jersley of Spacia. Ancient, mysterious, and demonic means have come together to form a magic weapon any wind mage would sell their soul for. Usage requirements, leave 90, 500 willpower. Seth was outstanding to see such a flavor text full of praise for once. Apart from the trait, the addition of the demon soul had led to an overall improvement of all effects the orbs brought to the table. 650% improvement of any kind of wind damage was one of the highest improvements of any item he had made so far. When he saw what Karen's obel had added, he didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. It added a 15% chant reduction, which on its own was rather mediocre. However, it worked together with the 70% chant reduction for wind magic, making it 85% for wind magic and 15% for other kinds of magic, which made it actually really good. It just looked a little pitiful in comparison with the rest of the effects. The staff had also inherited a lower level version of the original tree's ability to manipulate wind, making it similar to Shay's water ring. Seth knew from experience that manipulation skills like this, or his own pyrokinesis, which had evolved from fire manipulation, were a lot more intuitive than magic. With the power-up of wind magic, this could become a mage's stable, while any magic could act as a finisher. Maybe someone could even use the ability to protect themselves while chanting a big spell. He finally could ignore it anymore, the elephant in the room. The blacksmith put his focus to the effects of the forging ballad and the soul etching. He had felt apprehensive, but after reading through the effect, he was pleasantly surprised. I Am the Storm was an effect that charged with the usage of wind elemental skills and spells. After testing a few waves with wind manipulation, which handled similar to manipulating fire, he found that the progress bar for the skill was the dark runes that had surfaced on the wood, which would start changing color to a more bluish tint. Once charged, it allowed the user to go into an invincible state, and become one with the wind, for 2 minutes. While in this state, speed would be tripled while magic damage was lowered by 50%. It was the perfect skill for a hit-and-run tactic. Or, if the magic damage was high enough, to buy 2 minutes of absolute rampage. The skill that came with the enchantment was similarly handy. Active skill, Black Clouds of Isolation, no cost, cooldown 30 minutes, duration, 2 minutes. I am the storm that is approaching, provoking black clouds of isolation. Skill can be activated after leaving the state of I am the storm. Creates a field of dark clouds that isolate all enemies within. Sounds, chanting, communication and all senses will be blocked for the duration of the skill. The last one was presence of furfur, and it was also the reason for the sudden usage requirement of willpower. Unlike what Seth knew and heard, the demon had insisted on a price other than souls this time. It was not like the presence of Paimon on the Devil's Wheel Fiddle, which copied the presence of the hellish king that could suppress and harm enemies. The presence of furfur was quite literally the demon spying and trying to manipulate the user. One needed at least 500 willpower to not simply turn into a potato due to the demon's mental pressure on the user. At least it would have been funny if it was a literal potato. Seth had no explanation for this sudden whim, but he could accept it since the power it brought was worth it. He would just have to make sure nobody unworthy touched the thing and turned into a demon puppet or a mindless meat bag. The skills originally provided by the orb were not really changed for the most part, except that their casting cost was gone. The only one that had really changed was Wind Steps, which had turned into a passive instead of an active skill. Treading the wind, walking through the sky, was now a free passive skill one could toggle on, though one's walking speed wouldn't change, it just allowed one to walk on air, not fly. Still, Seth had quite a bit of fun walking around 2 meters above the ground, in the air like he didn't care. Also, with Seth's movement speed when wearing the Scorpio armor, he was probably faster than most flying beasts, by simply running in the sky. After playing around with the new staff, Seth turned to the important stuff. He had not missed the message about the legendary pattern. A partial pattern. The blacksmith had kind of not even expected that he would get anything at all, so a partial pattern was better than nothing, although he didn't quite understand how that even worked. The only thing that had him know that it was partial, was the announcement. In the list of patterns he had acquired so far, it was called Glinda's the Good Wind enchantment, it even came with the name of its name. He acknowledged that the name sounded a little fishy, but it wasn't like he had enough power of existence to just test it out and see what the difference was compared to the one on the orb. Finally, Seth placed the new staff in his inventory and left the workshop. "Seth, are you done, too?" Whedon caught him in the hallway outside. "Yeah, I just finished processing the last legendary material Spacia and the scene gifted us. Now all that is left is looking for their owners. Oh, that reminds me. Lena was here a little earlier, but your door was locked tight, so she left a message for you. There is some stuff she needs your opinion on in Galwal, or something, would be coming tomorrow to get his new item," the dwarf explained. "Nice, our PR pig is really eager to advertise our brand," Seth chuckled. He had only finished the hammer the day before yesterday and left it to Mary and Lena to contact him. Now, just 2 days later, he was already standing on their doorstep to get it. Seth was looking forward to what all of this would kick off. He was sure that his existential power would finally rise when he advertised his skills in such a prominent way, and it would only become more with the tournament a little later. Once he raised his level of existence, he would also reap more power. Once he had a reliable, high income of points, he might finally have the pocket change to randomly try something like Glinda's the Good Wind enchantment. "Thanks, I will go and look if she is still in the office." Chapter 932 Agreeing on an agreement. "Lena, are you in?" the blacksmith asked, opening the door to her office. He had just appeared out of thin air only moments before. It was early evening when he finished, so his question was rather rhetorical. "Seth? Did you finish early?" she asked, slightly surprised, looking up from her papers. The bard always felt surprised when he saw her flawless appearance despite working really hard. Not to devalue Mary, but despite becoming the chosen of Hestia, the scribe was still unable to make it look as easy as Lena did. Right now, he could hardly see a difference between the Lena sitting before him now and the cheek princess he met for the first time when Yulecat's fur still used to be her bodyguards. If anything, she became even more fancy, now wearing tailor-made stuff from Nico Booz, instead of the stuff that could be bought in a boutique. "Yeah, I just finished the last item made from the stuff we got from Y-City. Look, it's a staff." That what followed was a short, very quick monologue during which the blacksmith described and at times demonstrated the powers of the new weapon. Lena watched and listened in mild wonder. She was slowly getting used to Seth waving around national treasures like they were a new toy. Even as one of the many royal offspring of Krina, she only ever got the chance to see legendary items during big festivities, usually at the waist of heroes or great generals. The exposure to legendary items saw a dramatic rise after she truly joined Myanmar and was made privy to the secrets of the group. Even though her heart still jumped a little, with every new item, she had gotten much calmer over the past months. But enough of that, Whedon said you wanted to speak to me. The bard finally ended his monologue and put away the weapon of mass destruction. Right, I need your okay on this, Lena said as she pushed a small stack of papers across the table, for the Tower Master to read. Sitting down, Seth gave the document a once-over. While Seth had made himself seem busy pumping out legendary items, other people also did their work independently. Mary and Lena, together with the representative from Krishna, were in the thick of negotiations with Arjit Noor to have them release any slaves they still owned. Naturally, the undead were not all too willing to let go of their juicy vital slaves easily. It was a heated back and forth between the chosen representatives, a debate Seth had heard next to nothing of except that it was happening. The stack of paper she had placed before him was the newest draft of their agreement, including concessions they were willing to make if Arjit Noor released the slaves. After reading the paper for a quarter hour, he realized why she asked him for his okay. Seth had not expected that the undead would be so stubborn that Lena had to go this far. One of the key offers in the draft was that Myanmar would grant them a discount of 10% on golems, for every one Orihuma released from their custody. That meant the undead would be able to exchange 10 people for one free golem. Since Seth was not just the Tower Master, but also the guy who would be making the golems, although through an automatized process, he was the first instance she had to ask, before actually making such an offer. Suddenly, he had a great idea. Grabbing a pen and paper, the blacksmith started writing down a list. We will go with your proposal, but restrict it to the lowest tier stone golems. In exchange, they have to give at least 3 of these in advance and they have to open their borders for trade. Tell them that we will also exchange golems for natural resources such as necronite and the contents of the list, Seth said after a moment of pondering. You couldn't ask Krishna for these, so you trade them with Arjit Noor. Not bad, Lena commented with a chuckle. It was a list of master-tier enchantments Seth learned about but had been unable to get his hands on. This is good, actually. The stone golems were almost free to make, so there was only minimal loss of time when they gave some away for free. Still, they couldn't risk looking like pushovers by offering too good of a deal. There were various ways they could juggle discounts and conditions in this matter, but the enchantments were a clear price. The two brainstormed this for a while until Lena had to leave. Unlike Seth, the poor woman had appointments. Maybe I should take stock on our current storage, Seth mused. Since the staff was finished, the blacksmith decided to check on the golem forge, which had been put on a new floor below his workshop. Here, the room was filled by the incessant mechanical sound of the golem forge at work. At minute intervals, new stone golems kept leaving the golem forge. They were still the basic models equipped with Forgebrown's original golem ego circuit. After seeing the reactions of Arjit Noor's envoys, Seth had postponed his idea to integrate the automaton circuits of Hephaestus in these. Since they were already hyped about these versions, why make a better one the base model? Obviously, they would have to pay extra for that. Seth stepped to the golem forge and checked the crafting station's own inventory, to see that it had almost run out of materials again. Sometimes, he felt like someone shoveling coal into a steam engine, just that he was pushing all of the bedrock and debris the drones had amassed when making the new floors, into the machine. Using ordinary stone as the materials, production cost him virtually nothing. On the other hand, the golem forge kept producing rather powerful golems from it. Looking at the back, where the room kept expanding into the darkness below the mountains of Delta, he saw rows upon rows of uniformed stone warriors. The blacksmith had started producing these the moment he offered the deal to Arjit Noor, and the result was several thousand low-grade stone golems that could keep their own against a Level 50 dungeon boss of similar size. Although this did not seem very strong, compared to Seth's current power level, it still meant that it would take a Level 50 party of adventurers to take one golem down with moderate difficulty. And the adventurers in question were Orihumas, not ordinary adventurers. One golem was equivalent to a party of Orihumas, and there were already thousands of golems. Seth was really starting to get curious about how much power the golem forge actually had. At times he had been using it without pause, constantly running, but it never stopped or ran out of power. Did the materials he had been giving it simply not put any strain on the machine? What was the limit of things the forge would be able to do? Maybe it was worth a try to put better quality materials into the golem forge and see what the auto-generation was able to come up with. But that would have to wait until he was able to make Arjit Noor pay for his experiments. On that note, Seth held no fear that the undead would be able to use the golems against him, or the people of Earth. Apart from his fail-safe skill that was automatically added during the production, he added another nifty little feature which was the only modification he did. The cores of the golem, currently precious stones, gems, and monster cores that had started piling up in their storages because only a few of their new blacksmiths and alchemists actively used them, were rigged to self-destruct if a non-hostile tried to get a peek at the inner workings of his golems. Yes, Seth already predicted that the undead would try and reverse-engineer his golems. He was quite good when it came to not trusting people, or corpses in this case. Most of them were heartless and cold, literally, in this case. Although these were Forgebrown's secrets, they now also belonged to Seth, and he had no intention of sharing his technology with some rotten undead. Although the explosion would not be too powerful, simply because the core materials were all pretty low grade, it would still stop anyone from gleaming useful information from his creations. A high-ranking lich would at best get a scare from the stone golem suddenly going up in smoke, but things would be different if they tried the same with one of the higher tiers Seth was planning to offer them. Simple golem knights on golem steeds, animal-shaped golems for quicker fighting. There were many things Seth wanted to try later on. Once he secured their funding, stone and iron golems were only the bottom of the barrel. When he reached that point, he would obviously be using better materials, making one of the more expensive golems self-destruction and attack even a high-ranking lich wouldn't be able to get away from unscathed. With a scheming smile, Seth thought of the second business practice this modification would enable. Once a golem was damaged in battle, Arjit Noer wouldn't be able to repair it themselves since it would blow up if they got near it, depending on the degree of damage. This fortunate circumstance would enable Minasmar to offer a repair service and charge them again. The stone golems wouldn't be worth repairing, but golem knights? Or golem beasts? The higher price tier would really hurt their pockets if they were out of order after getting severely damaged once. Then he would offer them a horrendous price to repair them, reached the limits of decent business practices, but just low enough that the bone piles would pay up, while grinding their rotten, dry, and broken teeth. This was Seth's revenge for what he had to experience back in Deltan when he barely managed to get away with his life. Since this is cleared, I will return now. It has already gotten late, Seth finally said when their conversation came to an end. All right. Don't forget, Galwell will arrive tomorrow in the morning. We had already prepared a press conference at 10. Seth twitched at the mentioning of a press conference, but nodded as he left the office. Although he would have preferred to confer the legendary hammer during a private meeting, he was clear that this was needed, as they would officially announce the date for the tournament tomorrow, too. It was all necessary to gather power of existence. Chapter 933 Flooding Mountains. The Unclaimed Mountains. They had been left standing there, while Ceres took off. There was an awkward silence between the massive questing beast and the couple. One couldn't talk, and the others didn't feel like making conversation in front of the creature. They had been sharing evasive glances, even Blotches seemed to feel weird in the situation. Fortunately, or unfortunately, the silence was broken by sudden storm winds racing through the valley, followed by torrential rain, that quickly turned the almost tropical forest into a massive swamp. At this point, Mike and Lydia couldn't help that their first reaction was to cling to the questing beast, which was resisting the massive flood with relative ease, unlike the trees that were swept away by the dozens. Before they had realized it, dark clouds had covered the sky and seemed intent on drowning the world. Seth had once told them that he had experienced something similar, but it was during the early period of the apocalypse, when sudden weather changes happened so often, that they were technically common. However, they couldn't help but think that this had something to do with Ceres leaving so quickly. Ear-shattering thunder cracks and lightning strikes illuminating the dark clouds made it even more likely that the Parrot of Doom had picked some kind of fight. They could only watch the sky and endure the freezing water drenching their gear and rapidly cooling them down. Blotches managed to swing to an exposed cliff, where they could hold on to solid rock for dear life, while the horrifying floods took land and forests with them down the valleys. Mike and Lydia watched on in horror. Despite experiencing a lot since Earth became a chaotic mess, this was something nobody could get used to. The only thing comparable to this was when Mike watched the giant field boss in Y-City lift its head, or when they found that Alzalsar had lifted the mountain peaks surrounding Delta into the skies. They were literally in the middle of a storm washing a whole mountainscape clean as massive floods of mud barreled down the mountains. The thunderstorm grew so strong that the two had to transform, to keep their grip on the rock, and not be blown away. Their claws dug into the stone, as they hoped for the calamity to go by. Flashes of lightning painted giant shadows across the clouds. The three leftovers, drenched like wet dogs, could only look to the sky and follow the fight in dissonant snapshots of shadows, accompanied by deafening thunder. Shit, Ceres is really fighting, Lydia cursed, a shudder going through her anthropomorphic wolf body in an attempt to shake out the water, only to get soaked by the heavy rain again. Yeah, but I think things are slowly coming to a conclusion, Mike answered, prompting Lydia to laugh a little. Mike had transformed into the shape of the giant anthropomorphic lion he could become as the chosen of Mahis, but his fur was thoroughly drenched and clung to his body, making his look a little dilapidated. Haha, sorry. Why do you think it's coming to a conclusion? Lydia asked, still with a wolfish grin. I'm the chosen of a god of storms, I can kind of feel what is going on. Also, the number and strength of lightning strikes have increased since earlier. Ceres seems to be on the attack, Mike explained it, deliberately staying calm at the teasing of his girlfriend. Just the moment he said it, maybe a little later, a figure broke through the cover of clouds, spiraling towards the ground. It was a massive, one-legged crane with bright, crystal blue feathers. It limply crashed into the mountainside, only to be chased by a pack of lightning strikes that kept mercilessly striking down. Ceres followed close after. The was shining brightly, covered in a layer of white plasma. Its beak opened wide and he breathed a massive ray of white plasma that descended onto the dilapidated opponent like an orbital laser cannon. Ugh, I think I'm gonna die. Mike groaned. A massive shock wave followed by a wave of heat washed over the mountains, instantly drying the clean rock faces and the party, almost roasting the latter. Lydia and Mike went from being drenched wet and cold, to almost dying from a heat stroke. Even the resilient questing beast had suffered a little. Was it incinerated? Lydia gasped, looking at the area where it had fallen. The stone was still glowing almost white. In the middle of the crater that was melted into the mountainside, only a single, blackened leg bore witness to the existence of the crane they had seen falling earlier. The Parrot of Doom, his plasma coat having receded after discharging this massive attack, gracefully swooped down and elegantly perched on the leg of its victim, which was several times its size when it was still alive. Caw, with an arrogant squawk, the mechanic eagle declared its victory to the world. Right afterward, Ceres was enveloped in a gentle halo starting from the automaton's forehead. Two long, crystal blue feathers materialized, looking like an ethereal crown, or two very long bird eyebrows. The party stared in shock, unable to understand what was happening. Minas Mar, Delta. Ding! One of your creations has slain a young rain bird. Your water resistance had been raised by 10%. Ding! One of your creations has assimilated the legend of the rain bird. Your level of existence has slightly increased. Ding! One of your creations has ascended to become a legend. Your level of existence has slightly increased. All stats +1. What in the world is going on? The blacksmith exclaimed, bewildered, listening to the notifications suddenly ringing in his ears. This time, he was a way to understand what he was notified of. He also understood what had woken him during the night, when he wasn't able to comprehend the messages. Ding! Your creation series has become a legendary beast of calamity and gained the moniker, Ruler of the Storm. Last time, it could have been a relic-rated item, he had made at some point in the past, but this said loud and clear that Ceres had defeated a creature and ascended to become a legend by assimilating the legend of its opponent. The assimilation of someone else's legend. This was another way for legends to grow. People on the path to legend, especially those based around combat ability, could fight each other and the loser's deeds on the path would become a footnote to grow the story of someone else. It was probably the easiest way to grow as a legend, similar to the journey of Heracles and his 12 labors. The greater the deeds under one's belt, the bigger the legend could become. Almost nobody spoke about the teacher Heracles almost beat to death, but everyone knew about the Hydra. It was a shame that this option was not open to Seth unless he bested other blacksmiths on the path to legend in a contest of skill. Ceres was very powerful, but Seth was rather sure that it was still some distance away from becoming a legend. Just what rank was this rain bird, for its power of existence to allow Ceres to directly rank up? Also, the moniker Ruler of the Storm sounded very imposing. Judging by the name of the opponent, Seth guessed that this moniker came about because Ceres now also learned the aspect of water, in addition to the lightning, wind, and clouds the former elemental already reigned over. There was a small hope that his intuition had him send Ceres to help Mike, so the Parrot of Doom could get this opportunity. Even if it was a danger to Mike that made him act, it was very calming to know he had a legend on his side, now. In general, it was good that they had another legend among their ranks. considering that they might get into the crosshairs of the big shots of the Pathworks since they were going to announce Seth's skill tomorrow. Chapter 934 Announcement. Minas Mar had really outdone themselves with the preparations today. Compared to the times before when they still lacked experience and things were done a little amateurishly, they had really managed to set up a massive press conference. The vast entrance hall of Minas Mar's embassy was open to a selected crowd of VIPs and reporters. The place was filled with chairs and a small stage was set up. Bryce, the master of Delta's Adventurer Guild, was sitting in the first row, right below the stage. Other guests apart from him included the various guild masters of the last few prominent guilds in Delta and from the subsidiary guilds of Minas March. He also spotted Mehdi Bar, the manager of the auction house, the current representative of Krana in Delta, as well as the envoys from Gamma, a pair of dark elves. Even some of the foreign merchants Seth had bullied were invited and sat among the crowd. He could also see the lords of Minas Mar, as well as the other high-ranking members of the guild sitting and standing in the back of the stage. They were not dressed in formal clothing but displayed their overbearing gear. Even Bryce could help but feel a little envious. He didn't need to be able to appraise them, to feel their power. All of them were wearing dozens of pieces, that could have a party fall out with each other. He had seen people kill their friends for stuff, that was worse. What a great occasion, with so much interesting stuff already happening. An entertained smile played around his lips, and he waited. People were finding their seats, the crowd was still arriving. Everyone hurried to get seated as the conference would soon begin. Bryce glanced to the entrance, where a hard-to-ignore figure had appeared. WebNovel, the leader of Gamma Resistance, had just entered, and everyone could see metaphorical sparks fly between him and the dark elven representatives of Arjit Noer, who had appeared earlier. However, it seemed that today was not the time that they would fight in public. Others might have been in the dark about the reason why these two parties, who were like cats and dogs, were acting almost civilized today, but Bryce knew. Even if Minas Mar had not given him a heads up, he had his information channels and could make an educated guess. At 11 o'clock on the dot, the Tower Master of Minas Mar entered the stage, wearing an ostentatious, yet weirdly elegant and tasteful robe. Walking with the leisure of a predator in a herd of sheep, he stepped toward the microphone. "Welcome, visitors, reporters, esteemed guests. All of you were invited here today to attend a historical day for Earth and Minas March. I could make this a long and excessive speech here, but let's make it quick and loud. Galwell, come to the stage." Bryce smiled. Despite being a demonic bard, the Tower Master still was not one of many words. Still, there was an enrapturing power in his voice, that made it almost negligible what he actually said. The crowd, anyone with lacking willpower, was glued to his lips and their eyes focused on Galwell, like a burning lens, as the massive man stood up. The guildmaster had to suppress a chuckle, seeing the big rough man, usually unfazed by anything, now stand up and walk to the stage with an awkward smile. One was a bard of few words and the other a great leader with stage fright. "You have all been invited here to witness the reveal and the handover of the first, official, legendary item of Earth," the bard exclaimed and revealed the item with an attention-grabbing gesture. A massive silver hammer appeared in his hand, straight out of his inventory. Its benign light showed down at the crowd, their eyes glued to the godly weapon. It was like they had been hypnotized. Even Bryce couldn't stop his jaw from dropping a little. But not exactly because of the hammer. His eyes kept flying back and forth between the hammer and the members of Minas Mar behind the stage. Could it be? This was the first time he actually saw a legendary item from this close, and if Seth really told the truth, then the guildmaster could feel that many of the items the Lord and members wore were at least as good or even more powerful than this hammer. Yet, truly the first official legendary item. Hereby we announce that I, Seth Smith, am officially a blacksmith with the ability to process legendary materials and make special and legendary items. This is Tyr's gavel, I have crafted for the chosen of the god of war and justice, Galwell. What are its options? Mr. Roparts, are you willing to sell it? Will Minas Mar be going to sell legendary items from now on? Following the announcement, the crowd was in an uproar. Reporters were jumping off their seats, incessantly asking questions nobody could understand. Guests and visitors were stuck in a stupor of disbelief or wonder, depending on their relationship with Minas Mar and the Tower Master. Only people like Bryce or Mehdi Bar managed to stay calm, outwardly at least. The guildmaster was sure that Bar was as excited and disturbed inside as he was. There were only a few organizations across the patchworks that could match the Adventurer Guild, the auction house was one of them. He had no doubt the local manager was able to come to the same conclusions as him. Please calm down. We will hold a Q&A after the second announcement, the tower master spoke in a calm, not too loud voice, but his sentence cut through the roar of the crowd like a hot knife through butter. The crowd's torrent of questions calmed down to a murmur. Yes, in addition to announcing the first legendary item of Earth, we would also like to announce the rebirth of the Pythian Games in Little Gamma. In honor of the Tree Station's guardian, Python, we will hold various contests of skill. Another tournament. Again. It has been a while since the last one, but are they serious? The Pythian Games will be different. Although we will hold a PvP tournament, that won't be all. Contestants will not just battle it out, but compete in various disciplines, that will all offer their own prizes, the bard explained. Bryce had already known about the fact that Minasmar was preparing a tournament, but he didn't expect that they would turn it into something even more than the contest of strength from last time, which was meant for the applicants to prove their power to Minasmarch. What very few people knew was that this change was made at the request of Python herself. Seth had really planned to just make it a traditional fighting tournament, now this tournament was relegated to the main contest among many. The mythical Pythian Games were a place where people competed in various disciplines to show their physical prowess, their skill, and overall, the results of hard training. Python, who had inherited some of the knowledge of its predecessor, had put in the suggestion to make it not just about raw dueling power. Apart from fighting, we will have various contests for players to prove the results of their struggle. Competitions in speed, strength, agility, skill, and more will give everyone who is confident in their skills, to shine and earn epic or relic-rated items, or their worth in system gold. The specific competitions will be announced at a later date. Now the reporters were stumped, even a little confused. Wouldn't it have made more sense to put this message first? After all, it was not even remotely as spectacular as a legendary item appearing for the first time. However, their confusion was cleared once the Tower Master continued speaking. However, the grand prize for the Martial Tournament will be a legendary item. The winner will be offered a custom-made item, either from a material they themselves provide or made from adamantium. The biggest announcement was met with silence. They could still turn into a raging mass of questions when someone else got a holy weapon because of their divine sugar daddy. But this was a chance for anyone to earn a legendary weapon. What was a legendary weapon? Although it was an almost common occurrence in Minasmar, for ordinary people who barely ever even saw a relic, they were like a myth. The epitome of gear one could possess, an item that could allow a player to jump a gap of several tens of levels, simply by owning it. Bryce watched the silent reporters as the realization grew in their eyes. Even he was tempted to take part in the tournament. Okay, any questions? At the prompt of the Tower Master, everything broke loose. Many of the reporters even lost their reason and jumped off their seats, shouting their questions. Others didn't bother asking questions and simply ran off to post the news as quickly as possible, even if they didn't have details. Chapter 935 News Spreading. Somewhere in the unclaimed mountains. In a dark cave, filled with the stench of evil and death, sat a man dressed in dark rags. It was hard to tell what their original color was, as they were covered in layers of various stains of indeterminate nature. His hideous face, disfigured by dark necrotic blotches, pockmarks, and wounds seeping with pus, was reflected in the small orb he was holding as close to his face as he could, so he didn't have to recognize his own reflection. So they finally announced it to the world, he mumbled. His chapped lips broke, and a small stream of blood flowed down his chin, which was covered in a scraggly, unkempt beard. In the crystal sphere, it showed a recording of the Tower Master's speech and the ensuing Q&A. He saw the crowd of members of Minasmar in the background and felt his chest tighten when he thought about them. He had failed to be there when they really needed him. Stop sulking like this. Your precious Tower Master said that he would call you if you were needed. Solfium, the ugly son, reminded him with a scoff. This made Ray feel even worse. Seth didn't even ask him for help, was he already forgotten? After becoming the saint of the god of magic and curses, Solfium had him run all around the continent, searching for dungeons and sources of dark power and miasma to absorb. His appearance had sharply deteriorated, as his, and the god's power kept growing. By the time he finally heard the news of what happened surrounding Y City, all of it was already over. Now he was plagued with guilt, on top of the insecurities concerning the change in his appearance. He had left without saying anything. Although he trusted Seth, what would the others say, if he returned now? He wasn't there in the time of their need, selfishly following the quests of Solfium. Would they even recognize him and accept him back as a member of Minas Mar? This wasn't about his ugly appearance as the Saint of Solfium, but he felt that he betrayed their trust. Gosh, you can just say you didn't dare to return with your hideous face or something. They will understand. The sunken figure jumped up, revealing a massive build, covered by the dirty rags reeking of sweat, blood, and other uncomfortable substances. What are you even saying? What kind of weak excuse is that? Saying something like this would more likely offend them, than anything. They wouldn't make a fuss about me looking like a half-rotten bodybuilder, but your dumb excuse would make it seem like I didn't trust them. Ray lashed out. Solfium simply didn't understand the people of Minas March. You didn't go, because you were not contacted. How is it your fault? Are you telling me to tell them, that it's Seth's fault for not asking for help, that I didn't come? That's an even weaker excuse than the last one, Ray mumbled aggravated. But it's true, isn't it? Sure, but it wouldn't help me explain anything. Ugh, if you don't like any of my suggestions, why don't you just trust your great tower master, hey? After all, I'm just your god, he's your boss. All of your worries are completely senseless as long as he gives everyone a good explanation. Listening to the revelation of his god, this time some of his doubts were actually cleared up. Solfium was right, Ray needed to have faith. Faith in Seth. He needed to trust the Tower Master that he would clear up the misunderstanding. It wasn't the time to worry about his return. He needed to work hard, so he would be able to return in the first place. He had to continue and gather strength, for himself and his god, so that Solfium would be able to bless a material and Ray could return to Seth to gain a holy weapon. I have rested enough. What is the next place, Solfium? Are you serious? Did you seriously just resolve to believe in your boss, more than in your god? The ugly son asked incredulously. What kind of saint did he attach to? Well, one of them has proven to be a lot more reliable than the other. He poked at the gods used during their journey so far, which was barely a bit better than being a compass for evil energy. Fine. Do you want reliability? I can sense for more strong sources of dark power in the closer vicinity. If we successfully manage to absorb those, we can start looking for the seed material, I will bless. Then we can make a trip back to your awesome boss and ask him to make a holy armament for you. Happy, the god exclaimed indignantly. Happier than you might expect, Ray answered with a smile. Okay, what's the closest one? Krana Empire. Prince Hardwig of Krana was also looking at a small orb. It was one of a special pair of orbs that were able to transmit messages across the pathworks. The small orb, whose other half he had given to Lena, had suddenly turned on and broadcast the scene of the announcement. The little blacksmith had actually reached the point of being able to make legendary equipment, but Lena even allowed him to go public with it. Was his little sister bragging about his possible brother-in-law? Or had she a less innocent reason to let him know about this? After listening to the whole press conference, Hardwig mused about the tournament they had announced. Did his little sister tell him to take part? Although Krana was not hurting for legendary items, it wasn't like one could have too many. Maybe she also meant to help them spread the news? From the reports, it was highly possible that most of the members of Minas Mar had stepped on the path of legends. They would now begin to spread their name and gather fame. There was a lot he could do for them, as the Prince of Krana. No matter what, the clearest message was to prepare. He wouldn't be the only one to get this message. Not just external forces that may decide to intervene, but Hardwig's and Lena also had to be mindful of their political enemies, if they wanted to help Minas Mar and prosper together. Although his sister was not part in the contest for the throne, Hardwig was. Fostering a good relationship to a source of legendary equipment, was almost as good of an achievement, as scouting someone like Seth. So maybe, this was actually a gift from his cutest little sister? Putting aside what he was working on, Hardwig left his office. There was a lot of stuff to take care of. Spacia, Durnham Duchy. It's actually him, the girl mumbled as she looked at the recording one of their subordinates had brought them. The girl was Nadina Durnham, the champion of Kelly, heiress to the Durnham family of Spacia. She instantly recognized the face of the man, who had forced her to do shameful acts with his demonic voice. She had managed to gain a lot from infiltrating the evaluation of Krana. Especially the corpse of an ancient dragon that was almost at the legendary realm had helped her family prosper once again, in the society of Spacia. Although she had broken many rules and revealed her origins, Spacia was a place where strength made right. Had she failed, she and her whole family may have been beheaded, but she had brought an absolute powerhouse, which led to them being promoted to a duchy. Since then, she had even managed to nurture the undead dragon with her growing skills to the point it re-entered the legendary realm, giving her one of the highest standings in Spacia, without being a legend herself. However, despite rising so high, despite gaining so much, there was one smudge on her great narrative, the man that had pushed her back. Even with her new authority, she had a hard time finding out who and where he was. It was hard to the point, she suspected other forces in Spacia had actively hidden his identity and whereabouts from her. But nobody was able to hide this from her. She had finally found him. Chapter 936 News Spreading, 2. Another master-level blacksmith, especially if they could only create legendary items from already legendary or special materials, was actually no hot news across the Pathworks. It was an important piece of information for power looking out for these kinds of characters, but in general, a master blacksmith was not in the focus of the public. As a consequence, the news spread rather slowly outside of Earth. Apart from the power that paid special attention to Earth and Minas March, it was one thing to simply hear of another master blacksmith in a different world. It was different with the context of knowing what Minas Mar had already accomplished. The army of oath guards clad in relic-rated armor sets was an open secret, only visible to those who could actually identify relic-rated items. As such, while the people of Earth were excited for a single legendary item, the powers like Krina, Spacia, and Arjit Noer were watching Minas Mar because of the high production volume of high-tier gear. To the people in the know, the reveal of the legendary item was a message that they were ready to step on the big stage. However, even those not in the know would come to realize what this day meant. The Minas Mar decided to reveal their potential. For now, Seth became known as a new master, and this reputation slowly trickled to other worlds. Aura. Sitting in a warm armchair, sitting beside a cozy fire burning in an old furnace, an old dwarf was chuckling to himself. He was reading a letter from Nadal that recounted the news from Earth. Toward himself, didn't watch or read much news, he was always too busy with work. Haha, I knew he would be able to make it quickly. Maybe I should really consider taking his offer and going over there. He seems to have built quite the organization over there, the dwarven master mused to himself. Although he was one of 3 masters in Aura's inner dwarven city, he sometimes felt lonely. After all, he was the only one of them who had mastered all 3, blacksmith, goldsmith, and enchantment, in this place. There was no one here he could talk with about the cross-application of the skills. If it was Seth, maybe he had also reached this stage? If I'm really going, I think I should bring a present. I should try persuading Nadal to come, too. He has been stuck for too long in this place. Me too, things have become boring again, after the demons in the north calmed down. Nodding to himself, Master Tord started making plans for the future. Arendith. Please let me go, grandfather. Polter Onyxheart was kneeling in front of an ancient dwarf, reclining on an ostentatious throne. After reading the news of Earth, the dwarf was hellbent on emigrating and joining the Pythian Games. The dwarf had hit it off well with Seth during the short time they spent together during Krina's evaluation. However, after the initial delivery of Ithildan, Polter had no longer been allowed to leave their home world. As the grandchild of the king below the mountain, he had many responsibilities to take care of. Right now, more than ever, since their world was also going through great change, like Earth, as it had also only recently been added to the Pathworks. Although saying it was as bad as Earth was too much, just the dwarfs had a lot of trouble with random portals and dungeon opening in old mine shafts and unexplored caves. Despite having quickly come up with countermeasures, they could help the things happening outside their range of influence. Ever since his return, Polter was busy closing dungeons that had spread to the point that they connected to their mines and cities. The people on the surface were even worse off. Despite this busy schedule, Polter was kneeling before his grandfather for a chance to leave. When it was not just about visiting a friend and business partner, but to defend their pride, spread their name, and maybe attain a legendary armament, then maybe his grandfather would allow it. Polter was nervously waiting for the old man to raise his voice. The longer the wrinkly old man, with his sharp eyes, stared at the back of his head, the weaker became his hope. Finally, the king sighed. Fine, I know I pushed you and your father a little too hard for the past weeks. If these old bones were still able to break bones and crush flesh, like they used to, I would have given you all the free time in the world. The old geezer started reminiscing. Polter could only look up awkwardly. What was this old fart even saying? His arms were still thick as tree trunks. The younger dwarf had no doubt that the king could crush an ordinary man's skull with his old decrepit claws. Anyways, I guess those excuses are good enough to make the ministers shut up about your little vacation, he concluded his verdict. This means I can go? Poulter asked, looking surprised at his grandfather. Yes, it means you can leave to take part in the Pythian Games when they happen. But you would better get ready to get worked to the bone until the day of your departure, the king warned him, but it was no use. Yes, grandfather, I will do my best, he cheered, jumping up on his feet. Cinema Dimension. There was a new addition to the Pocket Dimension designed to look like a cinema, where the incarnations of gods gathered to watch the first master of blacksmithing, enchanting, and goldsmithing of Earth. Following the recent trend of betting, the addition was a massive blackboard to the right of the screen. In white chalk, it bore witness to the bets the gods had placed on a myriad of different things that were currently happening on Earth, surrounding Minas Mar and the recent announcement. Most prominent of all were the ones surrounding the reaction of the other forces to Minas Mar's announcement. To be exact, it was what of the things would happen first. Would Arjit Noor pick a fight over the business with the hammer and drop their agreement, or would they swallow their pride for a sweet deal? Would the sister of Kova finally make an appearance? Who would be the first to realize that Earth now allowed entry of legendary beings and breaches in there? Spacia? Krina? Someone else? Would a legendary beast appear somewhere in Earth that would alert everyone to the new possibility? As almost fourth-dimensional beings, the gods were able to see many possibilities of the future, however, they couldn't be sure which would be right. Especially when they deliberately didn't try to take a peek, so as to not spoil their fun. There were also many bets concerning the Pythian Games and Mike's divine quest. As Mahis and WebNovel had ultimately decided to join the business of Hades, Hephaestus, and Seth, the other gods could also access this POV from the cinema. Whoever is the first to bring in their legendaries and pick a fight with Minas Mar, they will be in for a rude awakening, Persephone pondered, replaying the scene of Ceres fighting the young Rainbird. The Rainbird had almost crossed the threshold to become a legend but had barely a chance against the creation of the little blacksmith. Taking into account that foreign legends would suffer a small suppression effect when entering a foreign realm, a young legend would probably not fare much better. Now that Ceres itself had crossed the threshold, the chances were even slimmer. And Minas Mar had two legends on their side, as far as the gods knew. If they come after the Pythian Games, they will probably have to face three legends. Apollo commented with a slightly sour face. Although the revival of Python's legend was not without benefits for him, he couldn't help feeling sour about it. After all, he still held quite a grudge for the beast of back then, despite knowing that Seth's creation had nothing to do with the original. Cuckoo, Forgebrand would really bite his own beard, if he saw with what ease the little blacksmith accomplished his ultimate goal. Hades gave a rare comment about his champion and predecessor of Seth on Earth. You really won't tell me Forgebrand's goal? Hephaestus asked, for who knew how many times he had already asked this question. Hades glanced at the screen. I told you, I don't want to ruin the reveal. I'm sure it isn't too far off, the god of the underworld said with a knowing smile. A smile so tiny, that only his significant other beside him could catch it. Although Hades was a serious man, Persephone knew that he also had a slightly childish side to him, that would peek out from time to time. Just enjoy the show, Hephaestus, she joined her husband in telling the blacksmith off. Humph, fine, he said, reining his curiosity in, for the moment. Chapter 937 Immortal Summit. Exiguang Province, Yujing City. Close to the center of the provincial capital of the Western Expanse stood a massive tower. This tower was 700 meters tall and built hollow, like a tube. The inside of the tube was filled with rows and rows of terraces and stands. The massive conference tower had been summoned for the Immortal Conference of the Western Expanse Province. The main point of the conference, which had drawn in most of the guests from all of the sects of Exiguang, was the question of the slowly waning spiritual qi in the whole province. Like all immortal conferences, there were also other points people wanted to bring up, such as the destruction of the bridgehead in the barbarian lands some of the sects close to the border had invested in to build. Master Mountain was also silently sitting on one of the private booths further away from the stage. He had no plans to talk in this place, which was why he chose a seat on one of the higher levels. To his eyes as a fresh first stage immortal, this distance was nothing. The lowest level someone needed to even enter this place was peak nascent soul stage. When the sun stood right above the tower and its light fell through the prismatic stone that made up the ceiling, a three-dimensional picture of the stage was projected on each level of the tower, for those with bad eyesight. In the middle of the circular stage stood a wizened old man, he was the only demigod of the province and a progenitor the reigning royal family among mortals in the province, although it had already been tens of generations since he started his journey as a mortal. He was one of the old monsters that usually stayed in the shadows, but today's topic was so important that he personally summoned the Immortal Tower and organized the Immortal Summit. "I'm glad so many of you have managed to come today," he spoke in a clear, deep voice one would not expect from his appearance. "I will not waste your time with superficial niceties. The reason I have called you all here for is to discuss the recent decline in spiritual qi in our Xiguang province. Some of you may not have noticed yet, but I'm sure those of the immortal level know what I'm talking about." A great murmur went through the audience. Some of them had noticed, but it was news for most. This was terrible news for everyone present. Their Xiguang province was already sparse in spiritual qi and was lacking in power compared to their neighbors. If their qi declined even further, it would not take long for their neighbors to notice. At that point, they would face the danger of being invaded. Not to mention that raising the next generations and improving their realm would slow down. Especially the sects involved with the business on earth were dismayed. They had just imported batches of fresh disciples and servants. The patriarchs of the 10 sects and I have already found the cause for this problem. It is the fresh connection to a new barbarian land, he revealed. As many of you should know, our voracious cloud continent will sometimes connect and even absorb new lands it comes across during its journey through the cosmos. Just like this Xiguang province was once an individual world. In the old texts, I found that we were already connected to this world before. At that time it was not absorbed but simply disconnected after bringing our province a prosperous era. After a full revolution of the cloud continent's path, it was reconnected. However, we found that this new connection is different. As it stabilizes, instead of absorbing from or exchanging spiritual qi with the new world, this connection is stagnating. Some power from the other side has stopped the voracious cloud continent's actions. This led to the qi from our world to flow to the barbarian lands to normalize the saturation of qi between the two worlds. Not only are we slowly losing qi, but our world is also stuck here until this connection is cut off, or the new world was absorbed. The question is how we can achieve this. That is why I have called all of you here. I hope that you can help find the solution. Unlike the previous murmur, the crowd felt silent. Master Mountain had a difficult expression, as the elder continued explaining their plans. The first step for him and the 10 sects was to work on a seal that would stop any more qi from being lost. They intended to finish before the passage fully stabilized. But this was only a temporary solution. They needed more information about this anomaly to find a way to fix it. Not even the highest level cultivators in the central region had the power to sever a connection the continent had opened. Their only chance was to get rid of the anomaly, so the continent could proceed with business as usual. The problem was the how. This was why the elder had called for the Immortal Summit. They needed the sects of the Xiguang province to come together and launch a true expedition to these barbarian lands to collect information and find out the source of the anomaly. Master Mountain frowned. So far it had only been the fiendish path that held interest in the new world. Even the alliance that built the bridgehead in earth was only made of a few small and mid-sized sects that bordered the entrance to the passage. They were driven by ulterior motives and most interested in easy gains, not really interfering personally with earth. This movement was going to be different. Thanks to the summit, a lot of big sects that would not have made a move at this time would be getting involved with the foreign world. He felt quite conflicted, as he had no idea how this would actually play out. One thing was clear, a peaceful interaction between the cultivators and the natives would be a rare occurrence. The old master had no doubts about that. To make matters worse, there wasn't just the righteous path involved in this. About a third of the seats in the tower were filled by figures of the fiendish path. This would not just end in a conflict between them and the natives, but there was a high chance that the people would use this chance in an uncontrolled wilderness to settle some debts. As someone who had seen and interacted with the people of Earth and actually had a rather positive image of them, he could only sigh in dismay. The best he could do was warn them before the storm came. In the next hours, the leaders of several sects stepped to the stage, volunteering to their sects to go and discussing their course of action. Master Mountain was not the only one who knew what would happen over there, so many decided to set up rules beforehand. Although there was no guarantee for anyone to uphold them, at least they could try to persecute the culprits if they broke them. A historic moment was that this situation actually led to a shaky truce between the two paths, as both agreed that the mission was more important than their conflicts. Whether this truce was trustworthy was a different question. His own master and sect leader of the Luminous Mountain sect suggested a pacifistic approach when interacting with the natives, though many called him too weak or even timid for this. Although it sounded plausible, that working together with the natives could enable them to find the cause quicker, it went against the interests of the many participants. Especially the original sect alliance that built the bridgehead in Earth did everything to sabotage any peaceful suggestion. They had lost a lot with the destruction of their base, so they readily slandered the Earthlings as terrible barbarians that could not be talked to or reasoned with. You knew that most people were not as stupid as to believe that, but many accepted it as a ready excuse for their own motives. A new world that connected was always a treasure trove of resources and opportunities. They always heard the stories and legends from other provinces across the vast voracious cloud continent. The riches, the rise in status and power, many of the rich central provinces owed their power to the passages that connected them to rich pocket plains and worlds in the past. It was finally time for their Xiguang province to rise, so many were unwilling to give up on that because of something as cheap as humanity. After long and mostly frustrating debates, the summit came to an end several days later. Are you already leaving?" the Luminous Mountain sect master asked him, as the fresh immortal exited his booth. The wise old man looked at his disciple, who also looked like an old man. "Master, I'm sorry. But the least I can do is warn them." The sect master only nodded silently. "No, I'm sorry. I couldn't really help your friends. Just be careful. You have yet to consolidate your realm. People may get dangerous ideas when you are traveling alone in foreign lands." "Thank you, Master. I will make sure to come back safely." With a bow, he separated from his master and stepped on his sword, to travel to the next transport array. He would travel to the town closest to the passage and return to Earth. Chapter 938 Work-Life Balance. Former Gamma. The room was a dark crypt. Light was not needed, as none of the creatures present in the ostentatious room depended on light to see. The only illumination came from the dim, otherworldly flames burning in some of their eyes. Creatures of various shapes and sizes were seated around the table. After many setbacks, like floods, a zombie plague that even affected undead, and an exhaustive war with a bunch of regenerating psychos, Arjit Noor had finally managed to consolidate their position in Earth. After erecting their land of death, they had used the undead labor force to erect a glorious capital of undeath. Assembled in the room at the top of their citadel were the various leaders of Arjit Noor on Earth. "If this is how Minas Mar wants to play, then let us play along," a hollow voice that was not articulated by physical vocal cords said into the room. After a moment, there were consenting voices. It seemed that some had understood what the speaker meant. Others didn't. "What do you mean play along? They dare to make a deal with us, while strengthening gamma resistance, and have the gall to smear it into our face. We have to teach them a lesson," a creature in the shape of a pile of black sludge muttered, feeling like it was the only one in the room with a backbone, despite being the only one in the room without any bones at all. The sludge's exclamation triggered a collective sigh. "Let me elaborate. We will teach them a lesson, by capturing more people to exchange for their golems. This way we will hit them where it hurts the most, their money pouch." The disembodied voice explained it to the sludge, who coincidentally also lacked a dedicated thinking organ, like a brain. There were many smaller human settlements apart from the districts, either those that were built by survivors who fled or those people who had split from the districts long before the cataclysm. There was no agreement that hindered Arjit Noor from hunting more slaves for trading them against golems, outside of the districts. The people who had not gotten this before, now also agreed with the previous murmur. It was a good idea, that had much less chance to create diplomatic issues, than anything the sludge was going to present. "One of my ravens actually found quite a big settlement far into the plains in the east. There were even giants. If the distance wasn't so far, I would have already gone there to collect some good materials," another, just as hollow but more feminine voice, mentioned. "Gur'oaon," a jumbled groan could suddenly be heard. "It would take roughly 2 weeks going by land." "One if we take a white shadow," the hollow voice answered the zombie's question, unperturbed by his strong accent. "I take that everyone agrees with this plan then," the first, more masculine, voice asked in the round. "Then it's decided. Let's start a manhunt." "It's been a while," the voice concluded happily, when everyone, even the sludge, answered affirmatively. "Gur'oan," the zombies once again interjected. "Yes, we will even give them everything on the list," the hollow voice reinforced. While others were scheming based on the glimpse Seth had revealed to the world, the blacksmith was already working on the future. Striking a nice work-life balance, the bard worked on adding the automaton core circuit of Hephaestus to his own golem manufacturing methods. Trying to build in such a high-level difficulty circuit into already complicated processes was as hard as it sounded. The golem forge lacked the skills to engrave a golem core with the circuit, even if Seth fed it a blueprint of just the core. He would still have to make one like that himself. Similarly, the blacksmith found that adding the circuit to the soul formation also wasn't incredibly helpful. He was trying to make powerful golems that wouldn't cost him a soul. Adding it to the golem formation using souls would improve the intelligence of the golems he created this way, but wasn't his current goal. At least this was his simple excuse for not being able to do it at the moment. He just barely understood either of the two. Trying to fuse them was still too much for him, although he tried. Since he didn't make any progress in that direction, Seth turned to making golem cores by hand. For this he used some of the fresh batch of Mad Ithilden which was finally finished. Unfortunately, Seth didn't have that big of a supply of Erdhan Ithilden to begin with. The first batch of Mad Ithilden was quite small since it was just an experiment. The process of the Ithilden to soak up blood and transform took quite some time, which was why it took several weeks since the first time he created it successfully, to get a second batch. Although he would have liked to, he couldn't make a ring of Dionysus for every warrior in the field teams. What he could do was make various single and set accessories for all of them. However, this was not what he was going to do now, for a simple reason. The blacksmith was waiting for Arjit Noer to take their deal and hand over the stuff he requested. Namely, a list of master-level enchantments, which he would then use on the new jewelry and other items. So while he waited for it, he decided to work on some high-tier golems to sell. The highest tier he planned to offer to Arjit Noer were living armors. Epic armor sets, assembled and controlled by a core of Mad Ithilden engraved with the basic automaton core circuit. The reason he used some of the scarce material was because he had found that its influence improved the speed of the development of an ego. Of course, there were no long-term studies on what kind of ego would develop, but even if they got a little skewed, who cares? They were going to be someone else's problem for the time being. And he would make them someone else's problem if he got them back if they were a little too loco. What could be the worst that could happen? Destabilizing the very foundations of an undead empire through insubordination and rampant violence? This was a price he was willing to pay, to see where these cores could go. In addition, he came up with a system of 5 additional cores made of regular Ithilden. They were engraved with mana-gathering formations and connected by arcane gold, both of which would provide the golem with more than enough mana to operate. Although he couldn't combine high-tier knowledge, as a master blacksmith and master enchanter he was very much capable of something like this. Once a core was finished, it was time for the golem forge to assemble the armor sets that Cerberus kept making, together with the core, into a working, refined golem. The very first of these golems was even more experimental than the others that would follow. The rose-silver core made of Mad Ithilden became the center of a pitch-black armor. In a whirl of mechanical arms, the armor pieces were engraved and the insides refined with epic arcane gold inlays. The design of the armor was not a new one, but it was the design for the Dark Knight armor set Tord had once gifted to him. Seth had slightly improved the design and used the enriched Necron as material for the armor. It was originally sort of a prototype, for a new armor for Evie. A pale red light shone in the visor of the black armor, as the golem stepped out from the golem forge. There were no notifications about finishing an item, there never had been any, however. Ding! Your skill Golem Artisan Leave 8 has become Golem Artisan Leave 9. One of the skills that had laid dormant for a long time, because gaining proficiency was arduous, had finally leveled up. At the same time, the red light of the visor fell onto the blacksmith. "Master, what are your orders?" the Black Knight asked in a deep, still slightly robotic voice. A dread-inducing aura swung within the voice, caused by the concentrated power of death in the material of the armor. Forget the high-ranking undead and pretentious swordsman, this was a death knight. Chapter 939 Testing on a Field Trip. The massive fist of the mountain troll slammed against the black golem knight, who blocked the attack with its crossed arms. Despite enriched Necron being among the softer epic materials, there was no deformation when being hit by the full power of a Leave 90 massive beast. They had to travel quite far to find a beast, but the level was another proof that the world outside the district, especially the mountains, had become a lot more dangerous. Seth didn't know that it was not as bad as he thought. The reason that the first creature they found after searching for so long had such a high level was that only high-level creatures still dared to travel this close to Delta. Although the material was still better suited for armor than something like Mad Ithilden or Earth's Ithilden, Seth had made preparations beforehand. Among the basic attribute strengthening enchantments Cerberus had added to the armor was also the master-level durability enchantment to all of the armor pieces. Thanks to the network of arcane gold on the inside. Although there was no soul in this golem, the generic automaton core circuit he worked hard to learn from Cormac Pale was more than able to adeptly manage the power provided by the system of 5 different cores in the extremities and the network between them. Even if not all the enchantment could be constantly powered, Seth trusted in the ego circuit developed by the god of craftsmen to control the power in a way that would make it seem like that was the case. After all, items with permanent enchantments were usually a scarce commodity. Normal people had to learn to activate the effects of their items in battle. In that regard, too, the members of Minas Mar were living in luxury. Trust was good, but proof was always better. This was the reason the Dark Golem and Blacksmith in dark armor had made a quick trip outside, to find some beasts and test its battle readiness. Obviously, the trip took a little longer than they expected. What became clear quickly was that even a circuit made by Hephaestus needed battle data to be optimized. The Leave 85 Death Knight had been fighting for almost an hour now, but not because he couldn't have won by simply using superior stats. It was not going all out. Seth did not even need to command the golem to hold back and collect battle data, it did that much on its own. As such, the golem's use of the various enchantments, as well as their combat tactics, rapidly improved. Even if he couldn't expect the blueprint of Hephaestus to come with pre-installed combat knowledge, the incredible learning speed showed that even if it had the prefix of generic, it was still the work of a god. Where it had still been struggling to control and manage the energy at the beginning, it was now activating and deactivating enchantments whenever they were needed. After reaching this point, it no longer held back and went on the offense. The black gauntlets were suddenly exuding a black haze as they grabbed the troll's wrists. With an uncharacteristically cute whimper, the beast tried to pull its arms back, but they were locked in an iron grip. Or rather, a necron grip, as the black haze started to eat away and decompose the troll's skin and flesh like acid. The whimpering quickly became a screaming and squealing as the beast in pain tried to get away from the knight's corrosive grasp. But it was already too late because Seth had done it now. As the dark haze ate away at its flesh, black, necrotic veins started covering the creature. The troll's high regenerative powers could not withstand the power of death and soon it fell silent as the life left its eyes. However, it did not slump over like a sack of potatoes. A moment after the life was gone, death took its place and an eerie soul fire started shining in its empty eyes. Straightening its back was a new undead servant. Seth had created a necromancer golem, just the thing to make Argit knowers' mouths water. Although the golem had no necromancy skills, it was instinctively able to use the power of the armor and create undead. Having finished the fight, the Death Knight golem bowed before him. Obediently, the turned troll behind it fell to its knees and before the Grand Master. It was obvious that the golem ego also had control of the undead it created, despite not having any skill of this kind in its status window. Made from enriched necron, the golem was like a born king of death. All it lacked was data to grow. Although the golem wouldn't receive experience or aid from the system, since it had no soul and didn't count as an artificial life form, Seth was looking forward to how the madness of the core material would influence it in the future. "Master, I believe to have adapted to combat," the golem asserted. It seems like it. As a reward, I will grant you a name. From now on you will be Hoskin. Since you got more accustomed to using your body, you should also train how to use your subordinates." Seth glanced at the troll in the back, who responded with an empty, clueless look of its own. "However, I guess this place is emptier than I thought, maybe we should go to a dungeon instead." With a silent nod, Hoskin accepted his new name and the orders of his master. While the golem and his new subordinate entered Legion, Seth got on Dretjim's back to fly back to Minas March. Puffles and Tatzel were up to their own nefarious activities, so Seth was riding the golem griffin. They were returning home because Seth didn't intend to walk the way to the next dungeon. Instead, he used the tower ego to teleport to Minas Palin, the moment he got into its range of influence. The hall of Minas Palin's teleport formation was buzzing with people. Since it was open to the public of Minas Mar, there were a lot of adventurers that came here looking for work, or a chance to build a new life in the labyrinth city the Adventurer Guild was currently constructing. At first, Seth was startled to have suddenly appeared in a dense crowd of people and a stuffy feeling grew in his chest, but he had it under control. He was very different from the time when he was stuck in his home, or when he had just fled from Alpha. For better or worse, he was also a much different man from the child he once was, he thought to himself with a wistful smirk. He just remembered the visions he was shown by the obscure formation the cultivators had used on him. Although he was much more bound to his home now, than his past self could understand, he also got around a lot further than he could have ever dreamed of. Not to mention his travels on Earth itself, he traveled to Aura to learn his skills, he visited Krina, and journeyed across Kavati Koinan during the evaluation. Maybe he had become more adventurous than he thought? Nah. Tower Master, how can I help you? The clerk at the branch of the Adventurer Guild close to Minas Palin asked him with a trained smile. Although the regular straggler still didn't recognize him, it would have put the Adventurer Guild to shame if their clerks were unable to recognize a VIP. I want to book a dungeon. Somewhere between the levels 60 to 80 will be enough, as long as it's free now, the Tower Master ordered. After all, they wouldn't be able to have Hoskin level up, so the level of the dungeon did not really matter. A lower level dungeon would be enough for the golem to gather experience in controlling undead subordinates. Isn't that him? An adventurer in surprisingly good knight armor suddenly asked his companion, a man in a priest robe. The priest's eyes widened. Had they really gotten lucky for once? For their target to suddenly appear in front of them during an infiltration mission? I will contact Her Holiness immediately, he said and started a short prayer. The two watched the man book a dungeon for a moment. It seems that he is going to a dungeon. Quickly mark him before we lose track, the knight hurried the priest before their target entered the crowd and could vanish from their eyes. I already have. Her Holiness also answered, we are to meet with the rest of the squad before pursuing him. Chapter 940 Into the Dungeon. Ding! You have been marked by divine power. Duration 5 hours. Seth lifted an eyebrow. He had just left the branch of the Adventurer Guild and someone put a tracker on him out of nowhere. There was no knowing who it was, except if he decided to play along. As such, he simply continued with what they intended to do from the start. Alone, he got on his golem griffin and rode to the dungeon he had just booked. It was a level 73 orc dungeon that belonged to Kazdam, the kingdom of orcs. They had been staying low after taking a big hit during the expedition of the guild, mainly because of their attack on Minas March. However, the calm could not be misunderstood as peace. They had just been gathering their forces and reinforcing their positions. Because orc dungeons were not simply dungeons, but also thoroughly fortified on the surface, they were unpopular with the regular adventurers who came as normal citizens from Minas March. Some had whole forts and castles built on top or around the entrance. It needed an army to just get into the dungeon. Or someone like Seth. Since it was the closest dungeon with the highest population, the blacksmith ignored its affiliation and fortification and simply booked it. This was just right for Hoskin to test its skills. On the way, Seth released a bunch of small golem drones he used for scouting from Legion. Since someone marked him, they would follow him at some point, right? They could argue about him observing them, if they dared to track him down, right? While expecting to be followed, Seth soon arrived at his destination. In a valley at the foot of the mountain, he found a wooden fort, reinforced with various magic formations. This place was located close to the edge of the Holy Land and quite a distance away from the canyon at its heart. Go for it, Hoskin, he called out as he released the golem and the troll servant. The bard did not even land, but opened a gate to Legion's inner world and simply dropped them at the gates of the fort. Judging by what he understood about the wards and magic in place, the Orcish defense was not weak. It was going to be interesting to see whether Hoskin would even be able to overcome their defense on its own. Dropping to the ground, the golem did not strike a hero landing. Straight as a fence post, the golem knight struck the earth and rock. Its boots dug into the ground all the way up to the ankles. The troll on the other hand flopped on the ground like a dead fish, before slowly rising like, well, a zombie. Their arrival did not stay unnoticed on the ramparts of the fortification. In their own tongue, they cried about warning and got ready for battle. It seemed that they took the arrival of a single golem knight very seriously. Had the name of Minas Mars golem knights spread so far that even Kazdam was careful of a single one? To his disappointment, he soon found that they were not afraid of the Dark Knight, but the massive troll that accompanied it, as all their weapons and magic were pointed at the zombie. However, this dungeon's average level was 73, the orcs on the ramparts ranged from 65 to 70. Whether it was the magic of the few shamans among them or the arrows of the archers, they could only put scratches on the Leave 90 undead mountain troll. At a wave of its master, the troll that had been standing still started to move. It seemed to instinctively follow the will of Hoskin. It was really surprising that there really were no necromancy skills involved. Although Seth would have preferred if the golem had his own pocket dimension for his servant as some of the better necromancer classes had. Although it was a level 90 undead beast, the defenses of the fort were able to resist. Its fist hammered against the reinforced walls, but could only shake, not break them. Seth observed the golem Death Knight's next steps with great interest. A group of 20 men on horses cut across the hills on the outskirts of the Holy Land. He went this way. We have to hurry before the mark vanishes, the priest at the head of this group of knights called out over the clopping of hooves. Seeing a group of people actually using horses was an unusual sight in Earth, who had been heavily influenced by the system. People usually use specific mounts depending on their area of expertise and use. Especially in places like Delta and Minas Mar where the area was mostly mountainous, horses were not the most practical kind of mount. However, had there been someone to see this group, they would have been reminded of a historical film, much different from the mutated fantasy and horror setting that had grasped their world. It was an almost peaceful sight. It took them 2 hours to catch up with their target. At this point, the squad of knights arrived at the wooden fort. What had them halt in their tracks was that they were unable to see anybody at all. The place looked almost decrepit, as if there had not been anybody for a long time. The massive gates had been smashed open at some point in the past, the edges weathered and broken down by time. The wards and magic that had once protected the structure had long worn off, the knights could only see pale traces of it. "I will take the lead, follow me slowly," the scout, a knight in lighter armor, spoke up and got off his horse. The other knights did the same, leaving the horses outside. The well-trained animals obediently stayed in the vicinity, grazing the sparse grass. Following the scout, the squad slowly entered the fort. There was nobody inside, but something didn't seem right. The priest was walking especially slowly, inspecting everything minutely. The ramparts looked old and decrepit, but inside were signs of recent use. Many of the adjacent buildings looked new. Peeking inside one, he found freshly cooked food sprayed across the ground in great hurry. Marks of fighting marred the place. He finally caught on to the discrepancy that disturbed all of them. Some kind of power has aged and decayed many parts of the structure. We have to be careful, it's a truly insidious power. It's best if you keep your divine aura up at all times, the priest warned them immediately. The knights nodded seriously, none of them dared to dismiss his advice, and they enveloped themselves in a dim silver aura. The knight stopped and looked when the priest came to a halt abruptly. After a moment, he faced their questioning gazes. "The mark, it suddenly vanished." "What? But the time isn't up yet, is it?" the troop leader asked, perplexed. "Yes, there was still time, I don't know how it vanished." "Where was it last?" "In there." The priest pointed to a big building in the fort, that looked almost like a simple church. Inside, the floor was covered in carpets and cushions. At the back where the altar would have been was a set of stairs leading up to a stage. Behind the stage was a colorful portal, swirling with colors. For a moment they were startled, thinking it was one of the portals the great system fiend had used during its invasion, but it was just a dungeon entrance. Facing the dungeon, many of the men had complicated expressions. Even worse than the system fiend, dungeons had left a trauma in their minds. The fact that they had also come here via the dungeons made their feeling even more complicated. "He should be inside. Everyone, get ready for entry," the leader commanded. The members of the squad stood at attention before being led into the dungeon by their leader.